all this buzz around one nation, one election will have you believe that it is here, it is now, and there is no looking back. The Narendra Modi government at the center, even constituting a committee headed by former President of India, Ramnath Kovind, adds credibility to these speculations. But here is the reality. Not one or two, but four different commissions have made recommendations on the possibilities of holding simultaneous elections in India, the concept of one nation, one election. The last one was as recently as August 2018. Much like this time around, when this debate is being raked up months before the Lok Sabha election, even in 2018, this commission report came barely months before the 2019 Lok Sabha elections. It seems the timing is never really off. In fact, if anything, it is impeccable when it comes to raking up issues or introducing concepts into public discourse and debate, issues that are pet projects of the ruling dispensation. But there is a need to look beyond the smoke and mirrors, the headline management and diversionary tactics. And that is what this episode of State of Play is about. I am Anusha Ravi Sood. Welcome to the show. One nation, one election is a slogan for a concept of holding simultaneous elections in the country for Lok Sabha and state assemblies. Those batting in favor of one nation, one election or simultaneous elections insist that it will save a lot of resources, whether it is in terms of money, time, effort, human resources, personnel as well, and allows much more time, longer periods of time for governments to administer, to govern without disturbance. In short, people supporting it insist that if you hold elections at one go for all state assemblies, for the parliament as well, it allows elected governments much more time to focus on governance and administration instead of constantly being in election mode for one election after another in different states at different levels. In fact, those batting for one nation, one election also speak about how the model code of conduct implemented by the ECI every time an election is announced is a hindrance for administration and governance. Considering all of these concerns, one nation, one election or simultaneous elections may seem like a very simple one-stop solution. However, the reality is not that simple. Other than the questions of whether this will truly allow free and fair election, whether this will allow a demarcation of state and national issues, the very fact that we have to make several amendments to existing laws, even constitutional amendments to make simultaneous elections a possibility, tell you how cumbersome this entire process will be. I'm not the one saying that you have to make so many changes to laws, including constitutional amendments. It is actually the Law Commission that submitted its draft report in 2018, months before the 2019 Lok Sabha election. The timing, again, perfect, just months before the next Lok Sabha election. We are once again discussing one nation, one election. Throughout this 5 years, we barely heard any discussion about it. Anyway, going back to the draft report of the Law Commission in 2018, August 2018, the Commission suggested that given the existing laws, given existing constitutional mandates, simultaneous elections or one nation, one election is simply not possible. The Law Commission, in its report, put together a set of recommendations giving multiple options for the government of the day to consider if it really intended to hold simultaneous elections across the country. These are some of the recommendations that were made by the Law Commission. The Law Commission said that changes will have to be made to the Constitution, to the Representatives of People's Act, as well as rules and procedures of state assemblies and the parliament to even consider simultaneous elections across the country. The Commission also recommended options to synchronize elections in India. You see, election schedules in the country currently are very varying. There are some states that go to election with the Lok Sabha elections. There are other states that either go much after the Lok Sabha election or some of them much before the Lok Sabha election schedule. So the Commission provided three options for consideration. The first option that the Commission put forth for synchronization of elections is this: either advancing or postponing state assembly elections. What the commission said is that, take for example the current scenario. As of today, several big states like Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh are all set to go to assembly elections, general elections for the state assemblies a few months before the Lok Sabha elections. For states like that, the commission recommended that elections be postponed, the tenure of those assemblies be extended beyond 5 years so that those state assemblies can go to elections in tandem with the Lok Sabha election schedule. So, postponing elections that are due or extending the term of the existing government so that it is in tandem with the Lok Sabha election schedule was the first recommendation under this option. The second suggestion was, what do you do with states whose elections are due much after the Lok Sabha election? The commission recommended that if the states consent, then those state assemblies could be dissolved voluntarily much prior to the completion of their tenure. So, state assemblies can be dissolved voluntarily if they consent, and they can go to polls early along with the Lok Sabha elections. But what do you do for states? So many states, more than a dozen states that have elections that are either far after Lok Sabha elections or far before Lok Sabha elections. Take, for example, Karnataka. Karnataka went into polls in May this year, and the Lok Sabha election is much later, almost a year later, in 2024. What do you do for states like that? The commission recommended that states like that have a tenure only till June of the next Lok Sabha election schedule, or 30 months tenure. That's almost exactly half of the actual tenure of any government of 5 years. So the commission recommended that these states have either a 30-month tenure or a tenure till June where the next Lok Sabha election can be held, so that elections can be held at one go along with Lok Sabha schedule. But all these changes would require constitutional amendments. While there is space for a state government or even the parliament to voluntarily dissolve and call for early elections, no government has the constitutional mandate to extend beyond a 5-year tenure in power. So, to make those changes, amendments to the constitution will have to be brought about, going by the recommendations of the previous Law Commission's draft report of 2018. The second option, or the second way that the commission intended or proposed that elections, or the number of days we spend on elections, can be reduced, is by suggesting that elections for all state assemblies be held only twice in a 5-year cycle, so that you synchronize different state government assembly elections to be held in just two schedules in the entire 5-year tenure, and one of the two schedules will correspond with the Lok Sabha schedule. But then again, that recommendation too requires amendments to the Constitution as well as the Representation of People's Act. You see, neither these recommendations nor these committees are new. If anything, since 1999, India has had at least 4 different commissions that have looked into the possibility of holding simultaneous elections, and all of these commissions have given their recommendations. In 1999, it was Law Commission of India's 170th report. Then came the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law and Justice, whose report was submitted in 2015. Then came the Niti Aayog's report of 2017, and then the Law Commission of India draft report in 2018. Just in the last 10 years, there have been at least 3 such commissions and commissioned reports, but nothing really has progressed. And now we have a new committee which is being headed by a former president, which is also unprecedented in India. There has never been a situation where a former president has been called back to head a committee that will decide or recommend on policy changes, especially connected to elections. So then why now? What is the reason behind forming another committee when there are so many recommendations already lying before the government? Well, if you ask me, I see it is for the same reason that recently the Law Commission asked for suggestions and advice and recommendations for uniform civil code. The moment the Law Commission sought suggestions from civil society, registered religious organizations, etc., from different quarters of the society, there was a lot of clamor over will this government finally take a step towards bringing in uniform civil code. But if you do notice over the last few months, there has absolutely been no discussion on uniform civil code whatsoever. If those in the BJP or those in the government are to go by, it seems the kind of backlash that the concept of UCC or a push for UCC, which Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself made a few months ago in Madhya Pradesh, the pushback that the BJP anticipated or saw from the tribal communities across the country was not something they wanted to take on in the run up to Lok Sabha elections. That the pushback from tribal communities was seen as a challenge for the BJP in the run up to Lok Sabha elections, and now you see nobody speaking about UCC anymore. And now it is the time of one nation, one election to be the topic that occupies news headlines and news cycles for the next few days. The timing of this announcement could not have been better at all. You have to give it to those who initiated this conversation. This comes at a time when the government has called for a special session of the parliament, 5 sittings of the special session of parliament. What is the agenda? Nobody knows, but this special session of the parliament has created quite a bit of interest, allowing wild speculations on what card the government has up its sleeve, because this session was called for out of the blue, taking even opposition parties, and if those in the BJP are to go by, even union ministers by surprise. From whether the government will take a step towards uniform civil code, or is it going to be one nation, one election, constitutional amendments to take a step towards one nation, one election, or is it going to be the women's reservation bill? Is it going to be something to do with reservations for other backward classes in the run up to the elections? All of these have been the speculations on what will be the agenda, the primary agenda for this special session of the parliament that the union government has called for. All of these speculations have successfully drowned other important global headlines. For example, the alleged paper trail that traces supposed stock manipulation by Adani firms, or for that matter, even the opposition front India's meeting in Maharashtra earlier this week. The smoke and mirrors, the diversionary tactics, the headline management works very well with an entire ecosystem ready to spin it into narratives. Whether it is the Uniform Civil Code or the one nation, one election pitch, or whether it is these three bills attempting to replace the laws that govern Indian justice system or the Indian judicial system, what is common between all of these, of course, is the timing at which these issues are brought into public debate, but also the narratives that are spun around them in the run up to the Lok Sabha elections. All of these topics have a lot of gray area when you sit down to dissect and discuss them. But when they are introduced into the public domain, into public discourse, they are shortened into binaries. They are reduced to binaries, and those debating it are forced to take a stand for or against, black or white, yes or no. After 10 years in government, it almost seems like the ruling dispensation, led by the BJP, is more keen on seeking votes in the form of referendum on topics and narratives that is close to its heart, its pet projects, instead of votes for a report card of sorts of its development, of its governance, and what it has done in the last decade. If you thought that one nation, one election push was a step towards mimicking presidential style of election as against a parliamentary democracy that India follows, then raking up these conversations in public discourse so close to the elections topics that are pet projects of a particular party show clear intent of diversionary tactics to put narratives over ground reality. Think of it in terms of what it could be versus what it is after 10 years of governance. But it seems this headline management really works like clockwork. in fact, even impacting or affecting the opposition front's decision making process, forcing the opposition, putting it under pressure to expedite their own strategies, their coordination, their plans in the run up to Lok Sabha election. What better way to put the opposition bloc that is yet to get its coordination right? What better way to put it under pressure than to toy with the idea of changing election schedules? What better way to put doubt in the minds of an opposition bloc like the India bloc that was holding its meeting earlier this week? What better way to put seeds of suspicion in their mind in a bloc that is filled with parties who are each other's primary political rivals, primary political contenders in hundreds of seats across the country, who have come together hoping to put aside their differences to take on the ruling dispensation? What better way to create suspicion in the minds of an opposition bloc over early or late elections to force them into beginning a discussion on seat sharing, the single most important topic that could be the make or break for this opposition front? If this is the trend to go by, first the UCC, now the One Nation, One Election plan, I wonder if what comes next could be a possible public debate on women's reservation bill. Not even if it doesn't clearly over the last 10 years, multiple times, multiple issues have come into debate in the public sphere, but nothing has changed on ground. Even if a bill is tabled, will it really turn into a legislation? If that is the kind of zero risk that any government needs to take to create a narrative, then probably the women's reservation bill. Or could it be a change in reservation matrix that we have in the country? Or probably taking it further, if you intend to have to whip up more narratives, more polarized narratives, then maybe consider a discussion on changing the preamble, words in the preamble, perhaps at least two keywords, that is also another pet project of the ruling dispensation. Reading between the lines is not very difficult if only you see through the smoke. Thank you so much for watching. Do stay tuned to South First for more news updates.